Welcome back, family, to another episode. As the season keeps rolling along, we got to keep going with these off-season plans. And when the Utah Jazz came up on my radar, I knew exactly who we were going to have on. A familiar face, a well-known guest, my guy, Greg from the Unsalvageable Utah Jazz podcast. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Just right off top, I need to apologize to anybody who's watching or listening to this. I have been dealing with the plague all week. Today's like the first day that I can actually kind of talk. So if I get my PJ Carlissimo on, apologies.
Oh man, like I said before we started, Greg, ain't no need to apologize. We just happy to have your presence here. We're happy to have you and your wild takes here, man. And
Oh, let's go. That's
and
what I'm
let's
here for.
exactly, man. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's talk about the Utah Jazz. For the family out there, make sure you check out all of Greg's work. Everything will be linked in the description down below. But let's go ahead and get into it, Greg. Look, the Utah Jazz finished as a 12 seed, 37-45. I usually like to ask at the top of the show, as a Utah Jazz fan, are you happy? Are you content with the way the year went?
I think that I would be underrating this last season if I said that it was super successful. This last season went above and beyond, I think, any Jazz fan's wildest imagination. Like, everybody thought this team, myself included, thought they were going to be bottom 5 in the league. On paper, they looked awful. Brand new head coach. Nobody knew what was going to go on there. A bunch of just like unproven players, as well as like just a bunch of guys who hadn't really fully established who they are yet. Like, I knew the Jazz were going to win some games simply because they had 1 through 12. They had an entire roster filled with NBA talent. But again, I think I had them winning 20 to 22 games last season. They end up winning 37 and probably end up winning a whole lot more if they don't sit Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, and Larry Markkinen at the end of the season. We're probably talking about them as a play-in team last season, and I don't think anybody expected that. So wildly successful season, and more than anything, everybody knew this is the Jazz are still in a rebuild. But one thing that they were able to get this season established that nobody thought they would is they have a young core that they can build around moving forward. They've got Ochai Agbaji, who looks like he's going to be a perennial 3-and-D kind of do-it-all guy for them. You've got Larry Markkinen, who was an all-star starter this last year, and probably should have made all NBA. And nobody thought, like, I think a lot of people thought that Lowry was a very good player, a very intriguing player, especially coming off the run he had with the Finnish team in FIBA. But nobody thought that he was going to do what he did last season. And then on top of that, you've got Walker Kessler, who looks like he's going to be the Utah Jazz's starting center for the next decade. And, per 36 last season, post All-Star break, led the league in block shots. Looks like he's the guy who can be that perfect Rudy Gobert replacement moving forward. So you've got your guys. And now it's about filling in those holes. And the Jazz have a lot of holes in that roster. They're far from a complete product, but at least you have a foundation you can build upon. So this was a long-winded answer of me saying, yes, this was last season was super, super successful, and they have been able to press the fast forward button on this rebuild, and are a couple years ahead of where everybody thought they were going to be, including me.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you said it best. I think the Utah Jazz, what they just did this last season, is a blueprint of how you rebuild the team, man. You got rid of your star and key pieces with the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, and we all thought, not even just for the Jazz, just for all NBA teams, you're going to be in shambles for the next couple of years. Figure out identity, figure out what direction you're going. But no, the Utah Jazz, like how you said, just hit that fast forward on the rebuild, and now they put themselves in a great position. But what I want to know is, and before we get to more of the offseason, is like during the season, we all want our team to be competitive. We know we never want our team to be, clearly tanking. But sometimes when you have players like Wemby coming into the league, it's beneficial to tank. So what I want to know is, like, when the Jazz were when they were the number one seed, when they were 10-3, when they did have these crazy records, how did you feel? Were you like, yeah, I want to see my team win, or were you like, come on, y'all, let's just try to go get Wimby?
I'll say this, like the Jazz, regardless of their record, had a 14% chance to land Victor Wembanyama. So if you're putting all your eggs in a 14% basket, that's probably not very smart. So when I saw the Jazz go on that hot start and continue to defy expectations, I saw it as a complete positive. I think the Jazz were playing with house money. One, you're getting your guys that experience that they need. You're building that cohesion, that chemistry that teams need, as well as there are a bunch of guys on the Utah Jazz with expiring contracts, THT, Kelly Olynyk, etc., who you're raising that trade value. Yeah, and you're you're building that reputation, and it's we saw that with Mike Conley and Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt last year, and the Jazz got a bunch of assets for them, and or have continued to kind of stock the cupboards when it comes to their assets and who it is they can go out and acquire later in a trade or whatever. It's the same thing with the Russell Westbrook trade they did in the offseason as well. They were able to offload him, and going into this offseason had $60 million in cap space, which allowed them to go get John Collins and sign Jordan Clarkson to a big extension. So ultimately, I mean, I think the smarter thing is the Jazz were able to build around what seemed to be safe bets in their core, and as well as bringing in guys like John Collins and extending Jordan Clarkson, instead of putting all their eggs in a basket for someone like Victor, who looks incredible, but you never know. And if I'm the Utah Jazz, I go forward with my core instead of going all in on something that you're more than likely not going to get in the first place. And it's hard for me to knock what the Jazz were able to do in the draft anyway, despite not getting Victor Wembanyama.
Absolutely, man, and we'll talk about some of those draft picks soon. Keyonte George, there's your new superstar, man. But before we get into offseason, let me just get your thoughts on officially, what happened with John Collins. I know you guys got him for like basically nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about how you feel about that fit on him being on the roster, coming into this next season. What's he gonna do for you guys? In your sense?
Well, I mean, right off top, when you can get a player the caliber of John Collins for the corpse of Rudy Gay and a couple of second-round picks, you absolutely do that. And I preface that by saying John Collins has been on the Utah Jazz's radar for a long time. If you remember, at the trade deadline this last season, there were a lot of rumors about the Jazz trying to acquire John Collins, but the asking price was Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, and a first-round pick. So Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge played the long game and were able to get him for a fraction of the price. And one of the things that makes me very excited about this deal, not only because I think that John Collins is a good player, despite not putting up great numbers. I think that he was kind of a square peg in a round hole in Atlanta. But the Jazz organization is excellent at rehabbing players and maximizing their playing potential. You look at someone like Joe Ingles, who was brought in to be Dante Exum's babysitter, and is now going to make $60-70 million in his NBA career. And at one time was a runner-up for Sixth Man of the Year. Speaking of Sixth Man of the Year, let's not forget about what the Jazz have been able to do with Jordan Clarkson. This was a guy who was on the verge of maybe not being on an NBA roster, was known as a chucker, was known as a guy who wasn't a key contributor or a positive basketball player. Jazz turned him into the Sixth Man of the Year. This last year, he was averaging 20 points a game. And then again, look what the Jazz were able to do this year with Lauri Markkanen. Always an intriguing guy, has never really been able to put it all together. Jazz make him an all-star starter. And then guys like George Niang, another perfect example, a guy who was like a fringe NBA player who's now on his third NBA contract. So I expect the Jazz to be able to do their due diligence and find a way to make this work. I'm very excited. If John Collins is healthy, if that thumb is working right, he has the ability to space the floor. He's a good weak side defender, and I think he can help Lowry and Walker in that front court. And I see so much athleticism and versatility. And just on paper, think of that: Lowry Markkanen, John Collins, Walker Kessler.
Wow.
That
Yeah,
is
big.
the Stan Van Gundy form a fucking wall
Absolutely.
defense. I'm very, very intrigued. And I understand there are variables and there are some things that should give people heartburn, mainly how John Collins shot the ball last year. But I have a lot of faith in what the Utah Jazz have been able to do, maximizing players. So ultimately, I'm very excited. And, on top of that, this gives Taylor Hendricks, the Jazz's lottery pick, time to develop. And now he gets to go up against Kessler, John Collins, and Lowry Markkanen in practice, which incredible for a guy who needs reps and needs development.
No, I'm right there with you, and that's exactly what I was going to add. I was going to say, you bring in John Collins, and if you can revive his career, great. Then there you go. There you have your new 4-man. The same way you were just able to revive Clarkson, the same way you're able to revive Lowry Markkanen. You bring him in, and it's all a win-win for everyone. But even if you don't revitalize him as a player, you can still have him be that. I wouldn't say he's an OG in the game, but he's been in the league for a couple years.
He's a veteran.
He can lead Taylor Hendricks and kind of show him the ropes. And because realistically, ever since 2019, maybe it's some injuries and there's other context. John Collins has been on the decline. So if anything, the Utah Jazz can revive his career, but even if that doesn't work, he can just at least be a veteran for Taylor Hendricks and help him take that role. Because if John Collins is not there, Taylor Hendricks is going to be set on that starting role.
Absolutely.
Or Kelly Olynyk. And then your team just isn't looking as deep.
Yeah. I know, and I'll say this. I don't think the Jazz necessarily need John Collins to be the 2019 guy who was averaging 20 and 10.
Yeah.
But if he can be the guy who was averaging 14 and 7 when the Hawks made that Eastern Conference Finals run, a guy who did a little bit of everything, who could stretch the floor, who was yamming on Embiid, who was just, a nuisance. That's exactly the type of guy the Utah Jazz need. And, also, if it doesn't necessarily work out, the Jazz, again, have they have 15 first-round draft picks from now until 2029, and you could probably move John Collins that contract if you're trying to bring in a star. And if there's one thing Danny Ainge does very well, it's rehab images and then sell them at a high point. So, I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, man. I mean, I just think when you look at history, it happened with Lowry Markkanen, happened with Jordan Clarkson. What's the reason that it won't happen with John Collins? So I totally hear
I'm
you.
optimistic.
Yeah, I'm
and
right
especially like this. I'm not going to say it's like a do or die situation, but it is kind of a put up or shut up time for John Collins.
Absolutely.
This is a guy who needs to have a super solid season or two if he wants to get that next contract, and if he wants to really continue to carve his niche in this league.
Absolutely. And then even on top of that, expectations I feel like are set a lot lower than it was when he was in Atlanta. And that will drive people to just be like, wow, like John Collins is doing so much more, only because expectations is set.
Yeah, lower. I will say this. I think that there are some expectations from the Jazz, but this next season is 100% about development. And while you may have pressed the fast forward button on the rebuild, you are still rebuilding. You maybe have been able to skip a few steps by finding this core and exceeding expectations last season, but you are far from a finished product. This team right now is a fringe playoff team, play-in team. You certainly aren't beating Denver. You're certainly not beating the Phoenix Suns or the LA Lakers in a series right now. But in a couple of years, if you continue to build and fill in those gaps, and if guys like Walker Kessler and Larry Markkinen can have repeat performances, well, then you're really building on something.
Absolutely. And he's still young. I just looked at him. He's 25.
He's 25.
Yo, that's crazy.
That's the
dog.
thing that's so
Yo,
that's so intriguing about, like, everybody on this team is so young. Yeah, Walker Kessler, like Larry Markkinen is like the grizzled veteran on this team. He's 26 years old. He's a baby.
Damn, that's actually crazy, man. All right, yeah. So then that kind of leads me perfectly into my my next topic that I want to talk about with you. So let's say that Ryan Smith and Zanuck and Dwayne Wade and all them guys just walked through your door right now, and they said, Greg, we don't know what to do this offseason. What's our number one priority? What's the number one thing we need to get dealt with this offseason? That's maybe that hasn't maybe already happened already.
I feel like I'm kind of a broken record right now, but it's 100% about development. I think the Jazz did a very good job. I'm not going to give them, an A+ on their drafts, but I think they did a really good job. And if you watched the Utah Jazz last year, there were a couple of things that were pretty glaring. They weren't great defensively, they weren't super deep, and they needed more shooting. And I think with the picks of Taylor Hendricks, Keyonte George, and Brice Sensabaugh, while it's a bit of a roll of the dice and you never really know what you're going to get out of a draft when it first happens, I think they did a good job addressing those problems. I think that someone like Taylor Hendricks can be like a better version of a Jared Vanderbilt. Maybe like a Jeremy Grant 2.0, I think, is his ceiling, which is a very, very solid player. If you look, I try not to get super excited about Summer League. I remember this. I'm dating myself. This is how old I am, but I remember 25 years ago watching Greg Ostertag dominate Tim Duncan at the Rocky Mountain Review, the Utah Jazz Summer League of 25 years ago. So, like, I can only put so much stock in Summer League, but what I saw out of Keyonte George definitely raised some eyebrows. Like, he was first team all Summer League and looks like a guy who can be a contributor, kept his turnovers down, shot the lights out, was a good defender, and then, you look at what Brice Sensabaugh was able to do in college, and he can be that spark plug if he's healthy. And I like the pick. It's worth the gamble. Is like the 28th pick in the draft. Go ahead, roll the dice. So I think this next season moving forward is, again, all about development, more cohesion, more chemistry. Does Ochai Agbaji take the next step? Does Walker Kessler take the next step? Does Larry Markkinen have a repeat performance? And then do you find, like, where are the holes? Can Keyonte George be your starting point guard moving forward? Does Taylor Hendricks crack the rotation? Things like that. So again, this team as currently constructed is not making big waves in the Western Conference. It's a wait and see situation.
Absolutely.
And I think the Jazz have the ingredients to be a contender in a couple of years, but they still need to climb that ladder. So if I am sitting down with Ainge and Ryan Smith and Dwayne Wade and Justin Zanuck and the rest of that front office, I'm saying, guys, we got to be patient. We got to wait and see what we have and continue to assess the roster, continue to find the holes that we have, plug those in. Again, 15 draft picks from now, first round draft picks from now until 2029. There is a good chance the Jazz, make a big deal and try and get a star that can put them into contention. We shall see. But the Jazz have so many options right now. But I am of the mindset. Let's see what you have. Let's not go all in. The Jazz, there were a lot of talk about the Jazz maybe making a big play for Damian Lillard. And I'm kind of glad that they're kind of pushing the brakes on that, because while I love Damian Lillard and think he's a phenomenal player, I don't necessarily think adding Damian Lillard to this Utah Jazz team gets them over the hump. And you also, you completely blow your load on a guy like that. You have no more cap space. You probably lose the majority of your assets. and then you have a 2-year window.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And
doesn't even fit the timeline of
it doesn't fit the
of the
timeline.
team.
So, again, right now for the Utah Jazz, it's all about playing the long game.
Yeah, and that clearly it worked out with the John Collins situation, right? They played the long game and they ended up working out big time. But so what I kind of want to talk about is I agree. The Utah Jazz have a lot of decisions, but at times I feel like when you have too many choices, it could kind of lead you to staying stagnant, right? And this is what I mean. And maybe I'm not saying it as great as I'm thinking it in my head, but I think that you have to decide your direction and fully commit. You can't be in this half in, half out, because then you just get stuck in purgatory. Because right now, I feel like with the current roster that Utah Jazz have, at their absolute best, like this team is not a contender, but this team is a first, second round exit, in my opinion. And if what's that? That's purgatory. You're never gonna be able to get a high pick, but you're never really, like what you're saying, getting over that hump. So I thought of and this, and as we've been getting through the episode, maybe I've been pulling back on this a little more, but I had originally like a kind of a wild take of, like, in my opinion, you either trade Clarkson or Lauri Markkanen or both right now. And the reason why I say do that, I know it sounds crazy, and the reason why I say do that is because those are your two highest value players on the team that you can do away with, right? Jordan Clarkson's 31, doesn't necessarily fit the timeline. We were talking about how this team's extremely young, with Lauri Markkanen being one of the veteran guys at 26. So Jordan Clarkson doesn't necessarily fit the timeline, and he can have some good trade value. Lauri Markkanen just had the best season of his career, in almost every single column, every single category. So this is his highest trade value right now. So if you were to trade both of those players or one of those guys, you could really more fully commit to a direction, whether it is let's go in this full winning, let's get over the hump, or we can just go in this full tank mode, and you can still have your young guys in Keyonte George, Walker Kessler, Taylor Hendricks. But again, as I talk through this more, I don't know how smart it is to get rid of Lauri Markkanen. But Jordan Clarkson, I'm still big on getting rid of him, because I just don't think, as a 31-year-old point guard, taking away minutes from Keyonte George, taking away minutes from Colin Sexton, those guys who need actual minutes to make the mistakes and get through it, I'm still more on trading Jordan Clarkson. But kind of talk to me how you feel about that, because I think you need to commit on a direction, though.
I think the biggest question is, for whom? Who are you trading these players for? You have to, who's even on the market right now for the Jazz to go and acquire? I think, and then you have to analyze that. Like, who is this guy? If we bring him in, how does he gel? Because again, right now the Jazz are all about development. And what we talked about right now is that I kind of have to push back on this idea that the Jazz are in purgatory. You have to remember, like, Keyonte George, rookie, Ochai Agbaji, and Walker Kessler are in their second year. Lauri Markkanen is still only 26 years old. John Collins is only 25 years old. This is a young team that has already exceeded expectations. So, I guess for lack of a better term, you kind of have to trust the process and understand that, like, there are steps to get where you want to go. And while the Jazz, if you can see, the Jazz kind of started right here after the Gobert and Mitchell trades. They're about right here now with this current team. I would say, and I think you'd agree with me, I think the ceiling, or the floor for this team is a 500 team. Somewhere between 40 and 42 wins. I think the ceiling is they wins probably, they're like 45 and 37 and like a 7 seed or something like that. And I think that's attainable, which is that right there. That's 10 wins more than you had last season. That's the notable improvement you want, as well as, like, you get guys like Keyonte George that those reps. And while I'm kind of against the Jordan Clarkson thing, is A, they just signed him to a big extension. I think that's going to make it harder to move him. And B, you need, despite having a very young team, you need veteran leadership, which is why I love having guys like Jordan Clarkson on the team. It's why I think that someone like Kelly Olynyk on this team is incredibly valuable. Will Hardy talks a lot about connective tissue. Like, you might not be the main muscle, you may not be like the main guy, but that connective tissue to make everything work. And Jordan Clarkson and Kelly Olynyk and guys like that are that connective tissue. It's the same way that people like what Bruce Brown and KCP and guys like that were able to do for the Denver Nuggets this last season. Not the main guys, but big time contributors, and have that connective tissue to make everything work. So I'm kind of against it. Again, we'll see what happens at the trade deadline. We'll see, which disgruntled superstar asks out. We'll see if someone like Dame is still around. We'll see. But as of right now, I am 100% going all in on developing the guys I have. Because I think this core can be special.
Just waiting it out, man.
Waiting it out. Give these guys the reps they need. And just like, again, realize that you have one of the youngest teams in the league that's just brimming with potential, and just, I think, needs more time and reps to develop. And once they get that, and guys like Keyonte George make that next leap, and if someone like Lowry can continue to play at an all NBA type level, Walker Kessler has an entire offseason where he's in the weight room and he's getting stronger and he's learning how to, he can stretch the floor a little bit more while continuing to be one of the best rim protectors in the league, man. I have a hard time wanting to stray away from that.
Man, you gotta trust the process when you have a good young core like that. So when we talk about the young guys, that's exactly what I want to get into. Give me your thoughts on Keyonte George. I know you kind of talked about him earlier. Taylor Hendricks, Brice. I know Brice didn't get as much playing time out there during summer league. I was actually out there in Vegas and was mind boggled by Keyonte George. Like, absolutely my favorite player in this draft. To be honest with you, might be one of the best just straight up scores, just straight guard scores. He's extremely efficient. Like you said, keeps his turnover rate super low. He did have a nasty sprained ankle. So give me your thoughts on Keyonte George. I liked him a lot out there.
I think that Keyonte George is incredibly intriguing. Again, I try not to put a ton of stock into summer league. We see a lot of guys come into summer league and light it up and then flame out. The guy who comes to mind is Kevin Knox. He looked like he was going to be the next Kevin Durant. Again, the Greg Ostertag thing where I watched him dominate Tim Duncan. But what I did see from him, super, super intriguing. He did prove he can shoot. He can shoot from range and he can score. And that's something the Jazz really, really need. But the thing that I was really impressed with him about was how not only the efficiency, but his assist to turnover ratio. The guy wasn't turning the ball over at all, which is incredibly rare for a rookie. So I'm very, very excited for him, because I had a lot of, when the Jazz drafted him, I had a lot of questions about, well, is he a 1? Is he a 2? Can he run an offense? The Jazz, with guys like Walker Kessler and John Collins, are going to have a lot of rim running. Can he hit the open guy in the corner? And I think some of those questions have been answered, and I think he's far from a finished product. His passing needs to get better. His court awareness needs to get better, but he's a rookie. And I think the Jazz may have found a diamond in the rough. We'll wait and see, but from what I saw in summer league, I'm very, very intrigued. I hope they can find, the ankle situation gives me some heartburn too. This is the same ankle that he injured and missed quite a bit of the season when he was at Baylor. So they definitely need to figure that out. But just the raw talent, the foundation that you can build upon, incredibly intriguing. And I am very high on this kid. One other thing that I really like about him is that it's cliche, but he seems to have that dog. He's got a nasty streak. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, and that's the kind of mentality that I think the Jazz need. The Jazz needs some nastiness. I saw that a little bit. I've never seen it before from Lowry this last year, and I think having more of those guys is only a positive.
Absolutely. I mean, first game I saw him play in Vegas. 33-point double-double with one turnover. We're talking about the primary ball handler played 34 minutes in the game, only one turnover in today's NBA. That's
it's
beyond
wild. Again, I don't know how transferable that is to actual NBA minutes, but if it's anything comparable, holy smokes, man. Like the Jazz have their starting point guard for the next X number of years.
Yeah. That's crazy. They got a core.
I'm very intrigued.
The Jazz got a core. They got Walker.
That's what I'm saying.
They got, man, if Keyonte works out, you got Keyonte at the 1, you got Walker Kessler at the 5. Like you have your team right there to build around.
Like you have your starting lineup. Like I just reeling off this again, like far from a finished product, but like it's got to raise some eyebrows when your starting 5 is Keyonte George, Ochai Agbaji, Lauri Markkanen, John Collins, Walker Kessler.
Man. And we can't forget about my boy THT off the bench.
You got THT off the bench. You got Jordan Clarkson. You've got Kelly Olynyk. The Jazz just signed Omer Yurtseven, who played for the Miami Heat. I think he's an intriguing backup center. Again, like that's that connective tissue that I mean. I'm very excited to see what Will Hardy can do with this group because the Jazz have legitimate NBA talent up and down the roster. So now, again, it's about continuing on and like hopefully you can pick up where you left off last season, capitalize on that, and then just continue to kind of build that roster and fill in those holes. And I have a ton of faith in the Utah Jazz front office, and like I'm trying to keep my expectations in reality. But I do think this is a team on the up and up. They kind of remind me of where the Grizzlies were, 2-3 years ago, when the Jazz played them playing
with house money.
Yeah. They kind of remind me of when that 1-8 series a couple of years ago when the Jazz were the number 1 seed and it only went 5 games, but you could see the potential there. You could see Triple J was going to be a problem. You could see that Ja Morant was right on the cusp of superstardom. And like, I think the Jazz are kind of in that position where like they're not quite there, but they're knocking on the door.
Yeah, I'm right there with you with that, man. And honestly, as we continue to talk about the Jazz, I think I'm ready to make my early league pass team pick for this next season, and it's got to be the Jazz, dog.
Yeah, they're gonna be fun.
As we talk about this, I'm like, man, like every year, I'm not gonna lie, it's cool to watch the Jazz, but this year, I'm really, really excited to watch.
They're gonna be fun. They're going to be a very fun team.
League pass team. I'm not gonna lie, that's my early league pass team. I gotta
make
the pick now.
I know the Jazz only won 35 games last season, and I've been a fan of this team for 30 plus years. Last season was one of the most enjoyable and most fun seasons I've ever watched, and like I'm really hoping they can just capitalize on that because they played really fun ball. I think that Will Hardy is an exceptional coach and a guy who's really able, like not only with the X's and O's kind of stuff, but he's just able to motivate his players. Like one of the things about last season, despite not being super deep or having like a plethora of talent, they just played so hard and they were absolutely like a pain in the ass. They kind of reminded me, if you watch boxing, kind of how Ricky Hatton used to box, like a guy who just put his head down and charged forward at all times. And with just like, while not like the most skilled guy, like you knew you were in for a dogfight when you fought Ricky Hatton. That's kind of what the Jazz were. And I expect more of the same this season, but with even more talent.
Man, oh man. I mean, I want to ask you, to be honest, Greg, I really want to ask you early predictions as to where they play seed next year, but it's extremely early. Like other teams aren't even done building themselves. So it'd be a unfair question to ask you, man. But
I think like if I were to go on predictions just right now, with the caveat that I am able to change my prediction, because it's still the off season and who knows what the Jazz end up doing. And, I think that if there are more trade talks, the Jazz are going to be involved because they're one of the most asset heavy teams in the league. As of right now, I have them at 42-40 and a play-in team.
Okay.
And I think that's very reasonable. But again, we'll see. The Jazz could try to make a splash for a star if one comes available. It wouldn't surprise me if they were involved in trades at the deadline. So TBD.
Yeah, TBD. But yeah, I mean, it's really reasonable. They were just 2 games out of the play-in last season. So, I mean, with
Yeah.
the improvement of everyone bringing in key pieces, right there with you. But all right, Greg. So then, so I guess like kind of as we start to wrap up, last question, I always like to ask is, give me a word or a phrase to describe about how you felt as a Jazz fan this last season and how you feeling being a Jazz fan upcoming for this upcoming season as well.
My feelings of last year that I would describe as I was thrilled. They were so much better than I expected. They were able to leapfrog where I thought they would be in the process of this rebuild. Again, like I said before, that you've got your core. I thought they did such a good job in the draft, and I think they're a very, very intriguing team. Especially at the helm of Will Hardy, who I legitimately think is one of the best coaches in the league, despite being 36 years old. And this upcoming season, the word that I would use is optimistic. I'm very optimistic that this team takes the next step. Now, that next step is not, Western Conference contention. I don't think that they are going to be I don't think that we should be talking about titles or anything, but I do think that they will be significantly better than the 35-47 they were last year. I think they're more talented. Another year of this core working together and moving forward, and they all seem to have the right mindset. I think if you saw how Ochai looked in summer league, like that's a guy who was committed to the process. I mean, the guy, you can cut glass with that guy's cheekbones. He's in that good a shape. Lauri Markkanen, he wants to take the next step in his career. I think that he was legitimately bothered by not making all NBA this last season.
As he should.
I mean, all biases aside, I think that I would rather have Lauri Markkanen than Julius Randle on my team, but that's just me.
Proven time after time.
Yeah, not a slight against Knicks fans, not a slight against Julius Randle. Nice player. Just personally, I would much rather have Lauri Markkanen. And then with what the Jazz did in the draft, and making the move for John Collins, I'm optimistic that this is a team that is on the up and up, and is currently in the process of building something special.
I like that. Thrilled and optimistic, man. So then I'm gonna add a little audible right here, because I gotta ask you, because the Utah Jazz are in such a good track and in a good trajectory. How many years do you think until title contention? I know that a lot of things have to go right, but just let's say things continue to go right. How many years until you're in title contention?
Man, I think if everything goes right, let's say that they can, Keyonte George is your starting point guard. Lauri Markkanen continues to play at an all NBA level. 2-3 years down the line, Walker Kessler has at least one defensive player of the year. I think somewhere in the 2 to 3 year range, if this trajectory keeps going, they can be in contention. I also think, like, while the Jazz are playing the long game, they have so many assets for a reason. And if the right guy becomes available, they're going to go after him. I don't know who that is. Like someone like, let's just hypothetically say someone like Luka Doncic becomes disgruntled in Dallas. I have to think the Utah Jazz are one of the first teams to call Dallas. Like, let's just put it into perspective about what the Jazz could do with all of these assets. They have the assets to be able to do the Kevin Durant to Phoenix trade 3 times over.
God damn, they got it.
So yeah, I think, I have no idea as to what the Jazz are going to do, but they have so many options of either like making a big splash for a guy or continuing to develop this core and filling in those gaps with, guys via trade or free agency or however they go about acquiring those guys. But the future is exceptionally bright.
Man, the Utah Jazz are sitting pretty, man. The Utah Jazz are sitting pretty. And I feel like this is a good place for us to go ahead and wrap it up for the family out there, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this great Utah Jazz offseason recap, offseason plan episode. My guy, Greg, as always, appreciate you coming on. Do you have any last words you want to say before we sign off?
I guess you can follow me on Twitter. I don't know how long Twitter is going to be around, but I am at Dad Shamdad on Twitter, at dadshamdad.bsky.social. If you got a Blue Sky invitation, you can follow my show Unsalvageable, which I do with Sarah Todd, who is the beat writer for the Utah Jazz for the Deseret News, which is the local paper of record. And if you're into politics and culture and kind of the world at large, you can follow my other podcast, which is Brigham Young Money. Yeah, that's just about it. Thank you again, John, for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, sir, brother. Always happy to have a great mind like you on. Great basketball takes all the time. Love talking, love talking with you, man. And for the family, just like how Greg said, make sure you go check out all of his socials. Everything will be linked in the description down below. Go show him some love. Go smack that subscribe button. And for us, we're gonna keep rolling with these off-season plans. For the family, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, follow us on our socials, and we out of here, y'all. Peace.
Appreciate it. Thank you.